investigative reporting. There's science, there are science beats that do investigative reporting. And they need to find the resources in one way or another to do this. And the head of this beat, he wants this, he believes in this, and he drops other things to be able to do this with his colleagues. And of course, you buy these kind of products because they do something others don't do. Here I'll get something I will not get anywhere else. While with the general science news, you can get them in many places. Okay, and then there's this third type of people who have been very strong in the past years, those who are very much audience and business oriented, who say, we are not among those journalists who think what is best for the audience. We really want to find out what the people really want to read and watch. On TV, you can see what people like and what they don't like. And then they orient towards it. And then they do lots of, entertaining science news to use reports. People want help in their daily life with scientific expertise, and this sells well, and they know exactly, and they do market research, and then they offer exactly this to their audience. And there's nothing wrong about this. It's just the problem is when nobody else does anything else. And at the moment, this sells well, and this works even in times of crisis. But it also has a different way of organizing the work. The whole organizational structure of a beat or a general organization like this is about efficiency. It's about job division and clearly defined roles. It's also about interesting stories. A lot of magazines that don't call themselves science magazines, but that cover science, they just look for the interesting stuff. It doesn't always have to be recent science news. You can discuss the mother-child relationship from a scientific point of view anytime. You don't need a new study to talk about this. And there are lots of stories of why children don't like broccoli and so on. You can do this every year. Every summer you can talk about sunburn. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Oh, maybe after I'm gone through these four, you can discuss the four types. I'm sure you can find them in the Canadian media. Okay, and then the fourth is the one I like best because it's new. It's the Specialized Correspondence Office. It's something I have observed in one case on the radio. There was this environmental beat that suddenly had no environmental show anymore. Suddenly there was a reform on German public radio. They decided we don't need environmental magazines. Nobody listens to this. And suddenly there were 3 people who didn't know what to do. But these are really, really good journalists who met the standards of the political reporters very quickly. They were very, very talented, very good radio journalists. And they just said, okay, there's a correspondent in Moscow, there's a correspondent in Nairobi. We are the correspondents for environmental politics. And we will do something other people can't do, and fast, and a lot. So when it comes down to it, and I observed them when Germany was in a big crisis on mad cow's disease, they produced 50 reports a day, the 3 of them, in a very, very efficient manner. They did lots of different formats for all the 5 different radio channels they were supposed to work for. Very flexible, very, very professional journalistically. These people exist also in the large newspapers. You always think the newspaper science editors, they only write for their weekly page. But most of them today, they contribute to all beats. They work together with the economy beat, and they work together for the first pages and for the children's page sometimes, and so on. I think you can, if you would make a study now with the catastrophe in Japan, you can tell the difference between the modern newspapers that build teams on this, and you can see they cover the first pages of the newspaper with all kinds of angles, and the others treating Japan politics, treating Japan economy, treating Japan science once a week, which is not the way to do it today. There's so much redundancy and so many things I don't care for in this type of making, because you miss out the important notions in between science and society and economy and politics. This is where the real stories begin. And it doesn't always have to be these big science catastrophes or stories. Sometimes it's the small stories where the interesting parts are in between the beats. And this is why I like the Specialized Correspondence Office, because they are forced to cooperate with other reporters. In one of the German weekly intellectual magazines in Germany, they had for quite a long time, they called it Workshop Reform. That was under Helmut Kohl, who was in power for I think almost 20 years. And before the wall came down, we thought nothing will ever change in Germany. And they had this team of 3 people from different beats who always asked other people to come in and work with them for a while to come up with new solutions for Germany. And so they made this interdisciplinary journalistic research effort to find innovation for our country. So this can come from a technological point of view, it can come from a democratic point of view, some kind of or philosophical way of looking at innovation and news. This is where the stories come that nobody else does, from the Specialized Correspondence Office. So it's those 2 things. It's these new innovations, new stories that they do, but it's also the quick reporting on for the demand of all the different parts of the news outlet.
Do you have examples outside of Germany?
Of people, well, what I want to, well, generally it's a mix. Ideal type means it never exists or doesn't exist so in its purest form. But you have many current science news. Well, I can jump to the next slide so you can see them all. You certainly find people or teams who do current news, science news once a day on their page and contribute to other parts of the newspaper. I mean, this you will find in many places. I'm sure The Guardian and many news outlets do this. I mean, in television they have, of course, their science reportage once a week, but they are certainly today forced to cooperate elsewhere. Otherwise, they'll lose their jobs if they don't prove to the others they're useful. It's many science journalists who've lost their jobs recently. It's because they weren't willing to cooperate, and they could not prove to their editors in chief that they were useful. But it's tough. I mean, the people who are forced to work as specialized correspondents, as I call them, they don't have much power. They don't have formal power. They're not head of departments. They don't control a show or a program or a page. So they always have to be friendly to the others and say why the scientific perspective on things is important. Okay. So I think that's almost it for my first part. I have some conclusions. If journalism is to have a future, it needs professional and specialized journalists who can survive in the changing newsroom environments. The basis for specialized journalism, and I've made the point that it's important, must be excellent proficiency in general journalism. So don't get me wrong, I don't want people with PhDs in physics necessarily to become journalists. Of course, they can become brilliant journalists, but what is most important is that, especially with these new demands coming to the specialized reporters, it's that they need to be as good as the other journalists. They cannot hide in their corner and write 3 times as long as the others. They have to have the standards in writing skills, and it takes a long time to become a good writer, and also in all the different media, because we work cross-media today. Important for you, if you ever think about writing about this or doing a study, every newsroom and every beat is different. There's a lot of ways of how it can be organized, and there's not always right or wrong. You can compare. It's good to do comparing studies of how people solve certain problems, but you cannot say this is how it should be done, because every organization has its own culture, its own history, and its own qualities, and this has to be taken into account. Journalistic specialization means the ability to continuously follow certain topics and conduct in-depth research. So with all this fancy about whatever they tell you about Web 2.0 and whatever they tell you about doing TV, radio, and online at the same time, for me what counts is the ability to do in-depth research and to know topics, to follow up on topics for a bit more than just a day. And not all newsrooms today allow for this, of course. Specialized journalists today need to be able to model and transform their content for different formats, media, and audiences. Of course, this is important in a second step. Organizational structures for science journalism need to be established in the long run in the media houses. This is what came out directly of my observations. Those newsrooms who had established, those science beats who had established working structures, who had the flexibility, who had the contacts, who had built a good team, they were able to react in situations of crisis and situations of special reporting need. Those who had not didn't have a chance in difficult situations, because you cannot within 2 days build up a team of people that work well together and cover a lot of, do a lot of coverage on one issue, or do 3-4 things in parallel. This is something you need to establish as the head of a beat in the long term, and it's not easy to do that. It's a fight, and I very much adore those people who can, over many years, be head of a science beat and establish it in their organization. Right, 3 more. Teamwork is important. I said it already. It's important to be open to new perspectives. It's not always the scientific journalism scientifique way of doing things. Sometimes we can learn from others, but sometimes we have to, also impose our way of doing it. And what is important, if I show these ideal types to heads of science beat, they will tell me, we do all this. We do all this at once. And that's wrong. Nobody can excel in all areas at the same time. You have to make a choice. You have to make a strategic choice where you want to go with your science beat. If you're the head of the New York Times science section, you can tell me which of those 4 points you're strong on where your weak points are. And if you can't, you're not being honest. You cannot do all 4 equally.